because man's task is to make the earth after the model of heaven. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Man's project is to heavenize the earth. Man is made to transform the world from glory to glory, to take hold of it and break it down and remake it after the image of heaven.
Welcome back to the Reformed Reset. My name is Grant, and joined with me is my beautiful wife, Erica, the weaker vessel.
Hello, everyone.
And also on the line on this episode is our good friend, Sandra Rowlett. Sandra, say hello.
Hello.
Guys, we're part of Take Hold Studios. You can go to takeholdstudios.com for more information. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and ensure that you hit the bell, like the video, leave a comment to help us reach new listeners, and that way you get notified every time we release new content. Also, in podcast world, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review, as it will help us do the same over there. Visit our merch store. There's a link in the description below, and if you want to become a patron, get exclusive content and exclusive access to asking us questions, right?
Yeah.
Exclusive access to the monthly Q&A. Become a patron, help support the channel, support the podcast, and also, we get to engage with you a little bit.
Yep.
So I think that's enough of the
That's
business.
Basically what this podcast is. This is our monthly Q&A.
Boom.
So this is for August, which means we're a little bit behind, obviously.
A little behind in production, getting this thing out, but
Yeah.
yeah.
We got a puppy, y'all. So
Things
our
have been
days have
busy.
been quite busy. And we went back to school.
We went back to school.
You quite literally.
That's right, in two ways,
Yeah.
teaching and studenting.
Mm-hmm.
We butchered our turkeys
It's been a busy week.
and got a puppy, and all sorts of things are happening. So anyway, forgive us.
Those are our excuses.
Yep, there's our excuses. But anyway, we do have a handful of questions. Sandra's going to help kind of be the moderator here, and there's a little bit of an announcement we're going to make too.
Yeah, Sandra's a part of that announcement.
That's right.
So one of the questions that we've gotten recently is, what happened to the Weaker Vessels Kitchen show?
Oh yeah, it's been a while since y'all put something out.
It's been a summer. So it is not done. We are just having scheduling conflicts.
Lives are busy.
Lives get busy, and lots of activities can get in the way of recording podcasts.
Right.
So it's not done with. We're going to arrange our schedules and hopefully get back to that soon.
Right.
That was a fly that you could have, just seen almost go.
We're not
down.
waving needlessly. We're trying not to get attacked by flies.
Or swallow one.
That's
But
right.
you will be happy to know that the Weaker Vessel is not a one-trick pony.
Far from it.
Sandra and I are going to start a little sideshow of our own, and it's going to be way less formal, way less structured, maybe?
Yeah, I'd say yeah. Sandra doesn't really do a whole lot of structure in that sense.
Right. Way less visual.
Right.
In that it will be a regular audio podcast.
Right.
And this one is going to be called Dial Up with the Weaker Vessel. That's the fly attacking my face.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this on the podcast, you don't see our hands just flailing about at the moment. But yeah. So
Yeah, dial up with
Dial
the Weaker
Up
Vessel.
with the Weaker Vessel.
Yeah. So we are going to, like we said, take a way more laid back approach. It'll essentially just be recorded conversations that Sandra and I have throughout the week. We have been saying for
Years,
maybe like 7 or 8 years at this point. I don't even know how long, but we should just record our conversations because we talk frequently throughout the week, and we think that our conversations are good.
Yeah, so like if it doesn't ever come to existence, then you guys just know we listen to ourselves and we're like, yeah, we're really stupid.
This isn't worth showing anyone.
Yeah. But you're going to hear interruptions from us, teaching our children, because we both homeschool, to, just us scolding the dog or whatever it is. Like, it's just going to be very rough, very raw, and yeah, so that's why it's called dial-up. Because for those of you who are old enough to know, a dial-up connection was never quite a strong one.
It was a little spotty, wasn't it?
It was a little spotty, but we were all like, it was, good times. So anyway,
That's right.
and
It'll be good.
yeah, we're excited about it. So look forward to that. Hopefully,
Yeah.
that's coming at you soon.
So that'll be in the podcast feed,
Yes.
but we'll share on social media when new episodes are up. But
and
ensure
we
that
could probably throw the audio up on YouTube anyway.
that's true. We can throw a
Yeah.
background and put that up.
We could figure that out. Anyway,
I can do that.
there's a way, I'm sure.
There is.
It should be interesting.
Okay, so
It should
Sandra,
be.
we gave you a list of questions our patrons had given us this month. You can be
Okay.
our moderator if you'd be so kind, and you can ask us the questions, and we will.
Yes,
try
I can do this.
and-
You can
Okay.
be our interrogator.
Yeah.
All right. So one question we had was mono versus multiple heads. Can you go a little bit more into that?
Okay, so I think that what this question is getting at was the Mono-Covenantalism versus
Yes.
bi-covenantalism.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, and right now off the cuff, I'm not sure who to say like this theologian holds to Mono-Covenantalism, or most are bi-covenantal. But there's sort of a controversial stance, which is Mono-Covenantalism, which I think is problematic. But essentially it states that all covenants are in essence gracious, like never in any covenant era, whether the covenant of works or the covenant of grace, was man not dependent upon God.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, we were always dependent upon God's grace. We were always in a state of needing to trust him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then they go a step further and say, well, then everything has always been covenant of grace.
Mm-hmm.
It was just under Adam in this one, and then it's Christ as mediator. And anyway, that's how I understand it.
You believe that?
No.
Okay.
That's
how you understand what they believe.
Right.
Gotcha.
That's how I understand what mono-covenantalists believe. So if there's someone out there who listens to this and I'm off, comment and let me know. But I think it's problematic because in Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is pretty clear that there's two heads of humanity. There's essentially two, eras there, two main covenants. Theologian after theologian talk about there's only two kinds of people in the world: those in Adam still,
Mm-hmm.
those who are in Christ.
Right.
There's the Kuyper talked about the antithesis. There's regenerate, unregenerate.
Mm-hmm.
I think once you blur the lines, you get into a lot of weird metaphysical questions about, what kind of faith was it? What kind of grace was it? What's the kind of grace we have now versus what kind of faith do we need to exercise now versus that? And I think it's largely speculative. However, when people talk about the covenant of works, they just want to be careful that they're not bleeding into mono-covenantalism, but also not talking about the covenant of works like Adam had to do a certain amount of works to then gain salvation.
Right.
Because they were created in a state of blessedness.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think we talked about that. They were created, and it says God blessed them and told them, be fruitful, multiply, take dominion, subdue the earth. So anyway, I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Good job, Grant. You passed.
Sandra?
Okay, here's one. How would you define Christian schooling / education?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, that's super good. You want to go
This is
first?
a very important one because we have talked about this quite a bit on our podcast. Obviously, we are strong supporters of Christian education, but I think it's good to actually define what that is.
Right.
And we have to first understand that nothing is neutral. There is no neutrality in the world. And this is why we do believe in Christian education, because we believe that when children are educated by a government school, they are going to be indoctrinated by government standards. And this is why we, really think that it is a Christian duty and responsibility to give our children Christian education. We do not want to raise pagan children. We don't want to raise children that are going to be slaves of the state, which is essentially what government schools do. So with that being said, Christian education is an education that recognizes God as creator and the definer of all things. Like, he is the standard. So when we do mathematics, we don't believe that there is a way to do mathematics in a neutral way. We don't think that mathematics and basic addition, the multiplication, is neutral. We think that mathematics can only work in a world that God created, that is consistent, that is sensical, that is all these things. And it does actually reveal bits of God's character. God is logical, God is consistent, God is all these things. And so when we say we're giving our kids a Christian education, what we're saying is, yes, we're giving them these skills, but also we're taking it a bar higher, and we're saying we can give them skills, and then we can give them the why as well. We can actually point to the creator and say, this is the skill, and we can only have this skill because of who God is. And this is why we are very careful with the education we give our kids. And this isn't even just like mathematics education, but like all education, right? This is why we don't just put our kids on a free online course because it's free and we can watch them from home, right? Like, I know a lot of parents would say, well, maybe it's a government school program, but they're still sitting in my living room at my kitchen table, and I can watch them to make sure that there isn't like a tranny teaching my kid or whatever. It's like, yeah, but they still are. You might be watching the tranny teach your kid, or you might be watching the government teacher train your kid, but they're still training your kid. This is why it is important that the person educating your child is a actual believer, because it's going to affect the quality of education, and the curriculum that they use is going to affect the quality of the education. Nothing is neutral, so we would not give our kids a Mormon curriculum. We wouldn't do it for the same reason we wouldn't put our kids in a public school. We don't think it's neutral. We don't want our kids to be Mormon. We don't want them to be secularists. We don't want either one. So we're not going to give our kids that curriculum or that learning environment, that teacher, whatever. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yep. Really good answer, hon. The only thing that I would add is that we have to understand that every fact in this world is something created by God, right? Like, God is the one who has created all of the facts in this, all the things in this world. And he is the one that has given them their meaning and their purpose and all that kind of stuff. Van Til said there are no brute facts. There's no fact just floating out there, and God hasn't given that meaning, purpose. He's created it all. And so that means when you approach math or science, math's a good example though, because that, for most people, they think, well, it doesn't matter Christian or not, it's just 2 + 2 = 4. But literally look at what's happening in our culture, where we have walked away from God so far that we
have common core math
that hardly makes any sense.
It really doesn't. It's not even.
But they more and more today, we care about how you feel at the end, or what math class is doing to your identity that you want, or whatever, rather than just learning
grading on a curve. Like, there's so many weird things that we've done in education that have just made it so mushy.
But math, and a lot of people hate math. But God is, just let me finish real quick. God is that ultimate starting point, that if you start from the standpoint of God exists, he has given math purpose, he has given math meaning, he has given me math for all these reasons. You approach your math homework in a whole different way than just, here's your math, go. right? Without God in the picture at all.
Right.
God is that ultimate purpose
This
for
is what I was going to add to that.
Okay.
I hear a lot of Christians say things like, well, even if my kid is just a dummy, and I'm a terrible homeschool mom, if in the end they just love God, then that's the ultimate goal of education and home education.
What a shame.
And I'm just thinking, like, I just want to slap people when they say that, honestly. And I know they mean really well, and I'm not trying to be ungracious, but what I want to tell them is that you've bought the lie.
Well, yeah, you're doing the Christian version of No Child Left Behind or
Yes.
Grading on a Curve or whatever.
Yes, like you've bought the lie that education is neutral or that God is completely removed from it altogether.
Or he's not interested in all of those.
So when you
things.
say things like, well, my kid doesn't understand math, and so long as like he loves Jesus, it doesn't really matter if he gets math. No, of course not. And this doesn't mean that your child has to be like a mathematician when they're older.
Right.
But it does mean that you are explaining to your child, listen, this math homework that you're doing right now is a reflection of who God is and his good character towards you. And he's given you this so that you can follow him and obey him more fully, right? So when you have a Bible and someone says, hey, can you go look up John 3:16, you can understand numbers and know how to find John 3:16 in your Bible. It's a good gift from the Lord, and you have to understand numbers. This is good. Right. And it's not okay to just say, if you don't understand numbers, that's all right. You can still love Jesus. Like, yeah, of course you can, but you're not going to love him very well if you don't want to know him.
I'm pretty sure the men who came up with the chapter numbers in our Bible and the versification, the verses in our Bible, loved numbers.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
And we're pretty stoked about that.
We're pretty really grateful.
Hard to memorize scripture without that.
I think it's important to say too that what a lot of people receive as a Christian education, this happens with a lot of Christian schools that aren't presuppositional in the way that we've been talking, is it's basically the same education as a public school, but with chapel, right? Or a Bible class.
Yeah, that's not sufficient.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that's not sufficient. An education for a Christian must thoroughly be Christian.
Needs to be robust.
Everything needs to be learned and studied in light of God as creator.
And this is why if you feel like we're condemning a bunch of people, we probably aren't condemning nearly enough. Because honestly, there's probably a whole lot more homeschool parents out there who are doing a really crummy job and need to really step it up and give their kids a better Christian education. So
step it up, Erica.
Listen, I'm speaking to myself too. We revisit what we do every single year, and every single year, like we kind of tweak things and try and make things a little bit better, a little bit more efficient. We try and broaden our horizons a little bit, challenge the kids and ourselves.
Right.
So we're not saying you're to be perfect or that like everyone should do a certain thing in a very specific certain way. Everyone needs to use the same curriculum or have the same philosophy or whatever. We're not saying that at all. What we're saying is there are some that are clearly pagan and should be avoided. And then there are some that are dressed up as angels that are actually very demonic, and we should avoid those as well. And then there are those who have very good intentions and just really struggle to follow through. And that's where I think Christians need to encourage one another and ask for help when you need help.
Right.
There's no shame in that.
Yeah, ask for wisdom and advice from your pastor, from other people who are homeschooling.
It's just pride if you don't.
Yeah, and laziness if you're like, I don't want to do the work of really looking through the curriculum and finding, the one that honors God in every subject, Or
the one that would actually just be better for my kid. I think that's a really hard one for homeschool parents, is that a lot of times mom really loves this certain idea of something, but it just isn't working for her kids, that she's so holding on so tightly to this idea that she can't possibly let go of it for the sake of her children. And then a lot of times dads are just totally checked out of education altogether, which is quite sad.
Which is wrong too,
because it should be the father's responsibility ultimately.
And that is the starting point you need to have too, is Deuteronomy 6 and Ephesians 6. It is the parent's sole responsibility, not the government, not the church, not anyone else. It's the parent's responsibility.
And ultimately the father's, because he is the head.
He's head of the home.
Right. So if dad is just like, I don't know, whatever she says, no, that's wrong.
Yes. Yeah. God will hold you accountable for that,
Yeah.
dads. So
If dad is like totally checked out, dad has no idea like where his kids are at in each subject. He should know where his kid is at in each subject.
well, and don't be
Are they being successful? Is this
Yeah.
a good thing? Are they thriving? Are they not? Do they need extra help?
well, and don't be surprised.
Here goes
Yeah.
the ambulance.
Don't be surprised, dads, that if you're checked out, that your kids are going to be checked out
Right.
of their education and uninterested because they're just following your lead.
Yep.
You know.
Anyway, we could wax long on that subject. Do we have
Yeah.
any more questions?
Yeah. Okay. Government control and Christianity.
Well,
I think they kind of want to know like how much is too much control.
gotcha. So I'm assuming this question is like what are the limits of
Government.
what the
Yeah.
government does control? Because that is government, right? After the fall, it makes sense that God, instituted governments amongst peoples in order to restrain sin, and to punish those who do evil. So Romans 13, though it's often butchered by Big Eva types, Romans 13 prescribes a very limited government, and the magistrate's responsibility is to execute justice. Now, of course, the passage also says that they are a servant of the Lord. Well, servants don't make their own rules. Servants don't make up, their task list for the day. They go to their master and say, "What's my job today?" Right? And so, as a deacon of the Lord, the civil magistrate should be doing the same thing. Lord, I am your servant, so what do I do? And God has, look at that. God's given us his law. And now, some people will take a lot of the ceremonial aspects of the law, so stuff in Leviticus, and right, some justified this. This is one of the ways we disagree with Doug Wilson. Some took,
it does happen.
It happens. Some took Leviticus 13 and 14, and the priests going in and examining, quarantining and stuff like that, and there's kind of a downstream argument that the government does have a responsibility for like health and safety kind of thing. And I think that's pretty weak or at least it's extremely less than what they exercised like during the pandemic or something. But God's law is the marching orders for the civil government for how to execute justice. And like the Westminster Confession says, that law with the nation of Israel has been abrogated. However, the general equity of all of that remains. God's character doesn't change. God's lawful requirements for morality don't change. And so you see that's why it's no surprise that so many of the laws are repeated in the New Testament. But he didn't need to repeat all of them because they're already given.
So just give him the Kuiper because you want to go there.
Give him the Kuiper, which the sphere sovereignty.
Yeah.
So Abraham Kuyper, my favorite, pretty much. He helpfully taught sphere sovereignty, which he saw in Scripture that God has given specific tasks to specific spheres, and the family was given the responsibility of health and welfare of the family, which that's who decides who wears a mask or not, right? That'd be the father. The church is another rightful government, and they are given the responsibility to minister word and sacrament. And then the government is the minister of justice, right? And the government's given the power of the sword. The church is given the power of the keys of the kingdom, right? They can declare someone excommunicated or not here on earth. And then the parents are given the power of the rod to discipline at home. And the other one is self-government. Christians are, commanded to be self-controlled, sober-minded, and all of that sort of thing. And so prior to entering all of those other spheres, a person must be self-governed first.
Right.
But
so when we talk about government and how much government control they have, so the question was how much control can the government have,
or should
they have? They should only have what God gives them.
Exactly. And
that's the oversimplification
right
of that question, I guess.
And that's the thing too, is when one sphere is lacking in their tasks. So the church is what's commanded to help the poor and needy, the orphan, the widow, right? Well, when they're not, the government shouldn't step in and say, well, it's okay, we have a welfare program and we'll just tax people more. Right? All of that's a wrong answer.
Right.
Yes, the orphan and widow needs to be taken care of, but what should happen is the government and everyone else should go to the church and say, hey,
what's going on?
Wise up, shape up. What are you doing? You're slacking. Right. These orphans have, these widows need your help, and you're not giving them help.
Right.
There should be accountability, not just assuming. And that's what the government does more and more and more. And it does that more and more, the more and more it walks away from God. We have to recognize that those two things happen at the same time. The more a government walks away from God, the more power and control it's going to arrogate to itself, because it's not going to attribute it to God anymore. They're the biggest.
Well, and this is the post-millennial hope too, is that as we see the world's becoming more and more Christian, it's going to have effects in all these spheres. It's going to have effects on the individual, the family, the church, obviously, and then like the governments, because people make up all these spheres. So as individuals get saved, families will become saved, churches will grow and become healthier, and the government is going to become more godly, because that's just how it works.
Yeah, and the thing that sort of binds them all together and enables them to function on their own is the kingship of Christ over everything, right? Because of that, the government doesn't have to step in and be king over the church and say, hey, do your job. They don't have to, because Jesus is already doing that.
Right.
So they need to just stay within their limits. So execute justice, punish the wrongdoer, reward the righteous, right? Promote, right? So on the flip side, it'd be promoting righteousness. And so never restricting the preaching of the gospel in any way, shape, or form. That would be unthinkable to a righteous king. Why would I restrict the preaching of the gospel? That's what makes a people moral. That's what makes a people, be reborn by the power of the Spirit. So if I want an obedient populace, then the gospel should go out far and wide.
Then they first have to obey God.
Right. So anyway, hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. I got one more question.
Okay.
Nice.
What theology books would you recommend for like middle school age?
Great question.
Very good.
Come on, Mr. Library.
I know.
Well, theology is like, you can find good theology in fiction books too.
That's
I know
true.
that may not be like where your mind goes to naturally, but I think at that age especially, like, you're feeding imaginations. And imaginations and worldviews, and especially for little boys, I mean girls too, but little boys crave adventure, and danger and building things, and so fiction, I think, is actually really important at that age.
So along those lines, I would agree, and I would suggest the Chronicles of Narnia, and then beyond that, like N.D. Wilson's books, or that. I'm just going to limit it to that. Read through the Chronicles of Narnia. And actually, I just got done. Well, I'm in the middle of teaching The Magician's Nephew to a couple of my classes. And one of the things that C.S. Lewis wanted to contribute to with his Chronicles of Narnia, and specifically writing it for kids, was a thing he called ordinary morality. And he said this was something that parents would just beat into their children, right? Dragons are bad, ogres are bad, witches are bad, the knights are good, the king is good, right? Those sorts of things. And then you told stories that had that, right? You have, George and the Dragon, Sir George and the Dragon. and slay the dragon, get the girl. We always say that's what the Bible's really about. That was that old school ordinary morality in the Christian Western world that was taught to kids from a young age. So then when they grew up and they were faced with a real life situation, which is what
dragon.
fiction is, real life situations, they would know which way to go. They would know right from wrong. They would know when to say no to. And one of the things I talked to my students about was, imagine if Diggory in the story, if you know the story, but imagine if Diggory was only fed Harry Potter at growing up from his mom, rather than her beating morality into his head, which is what the book says. And then he faced Jadis, the witch, the evil woman. He might not have been skeptical.
Right.
He might have been a lot more trusting of her. Right. But when kids learn these stories with biblical morality embedded and interwoven in them, they grow up and have that as part of their inner being. Right. So I think that is a really good suggestion.
That's good.
As far as like an actual theology book, though, we always like to recommend Berkhoff's Manual of Christian Doctrine. It's small, but it's very good. It's not difficult.
I think you could easily, as a parent, break it down for a 12-year-old. Maybe you wouldn't just hand it to a 12-year-old and say, go to town by themselves.
Right.
But like if you went through it as a family, certainly 12-year-olds would be able to understand good chunks of what's being explained in that book. And with probably very little breakdown needed, because he is pretty basic, I think, with his explanation. Like he's pretty...
Yeah. That one is not...
He doesn't get fancy.
Right. That one is not... very detailed. Another book as far as Old Testament theology goes, and I know I've recommended this before on the podcast, but it really would be good for kids, especially a 12-year-old, is Peter Lightheart's Old Testament Survey, A House for My Name. And that book is divided into small sections. So each section's just like 4 or 5 pages, and then there's questions. So you could use it for a small group. You could use it as family worship or something. But it's a few pages, and Lightheart's just a great writer.
Right.
So he's not hard to read, and you can usually follow pretty easily rather. And then there's questions even if you wanted to check the learning.
There is a level of maturity that can. There's a how do I say this nicely? Some 12-year-olds are more mature than other 12-year-olds.
There you go. This is true.
So depending on where your 12-year-old is in the maturation scale,
yeah, it's true.
You could do something like Wise Words by Peter Lightheart, which once again is a little bit simpler. It's like a Aesop's fable kind of story.
It's kind of like that ordinary morality sort of thing.
But based on Proverbs. And that would be really good. And there's a lot of theology taught in there.
Yeah. So that's really good.
Anyway, some suggestions. Honestly, if you can find classics, like a lot of classic books, there is a lot of that old-fashioned morality in them, which is why a lot of them are good. I think you still need to be cautious as a parent. You know your child and like, how scary the book they can handle or something like that. But even something like Dracula, which is actually not a book that you would naturally think is full of theology, but it actually really is. And if you can find a children's version of it, which there are many, I think it's known to be like a Christian novel. Like it was classified a Christian novel when it first, kind of off topic, but a little bit on topic. After this, we can be done and wrap up this episode.
Sounds good.
But the interesting thing happening in our culture right now, as we talk about morality, is that when you turn on like modern cartoons or modern movies or whatever, the villains are being made the heroes.
Yeah.
I think that's so dangerous because it's like you can see that they're coming for our kids, that they're trying to corrupt our children.
Yeah, they're trying to pervert them. They're trying to pervert the way they think.
Yeah.
And we had talked about that in class too. What's Shrek?
Right.
It's a good ogre. Right. And then, I mean, on and on, there's examples of witches that are good witch. Or How to Train a Dragon, not slay it. You just train it.
Right.
Or even Dragon Tales.
Yeah.
Right. They're just cute and fun little dragons on adventures.
Yeah, but the Bible says, "Woe to those who call evil good and
Yep.
good evil." So this is, we're not saying your kid can't watch, Shrek or something.
No, or that all those stories are thoroughly corrupt and evil.
Right. What we're saying is this is just a thing that is like a very modern concept, and there clearly is something that's being done here, and we just need to all like acknowledge that. As a society, as a Christian society, we need to recognize that.
Almost like nothing's neutral.
Almost like that.
Huh.
Stories matter.
All right. Sandra, thank you for being our Q&A moderator, questioner person.
Oh, it was so strenuous. I just don't know how I made it through. Not a problem.
I don't either. Way to persevere. And,
I tried.
Tough it out. But hey, guys, that's it. Thank you. Again, if you want to submit your questions, please send them to us. And the number one way
only if you're a Patreon.
But yes.
We'll only answer Patreon questions.
So go to patreon.com/takeholdstudios and please sign up and become a patron, and then send us some messages on there so we can engage with you and get your questions.
And if you just did not get enough of Sandra Rowlett, then you can be listening in for our new podcast that's coming out soon. Our Dial Up with the Weaker Vessel.
That's right. It's going to be fun.
All
right.
All that zesty sarcasm.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. We will see you next time. Take hold and reorder creation by first reforming your home. This has been the Reformed Reset.
But on the basis of grace and on the finished work of Jesus Christ, the project is back and forth, and the destiny of a new transformed world is assured.
I just put the sourdough in the oven too, so I've got like 40 minutes.